Hello, I'm Karim Hatem. The G20 summit in Rio de Janeiro underscored a commitment to global cooperation against hunger and poverty, highlighted by the establishment of a new alliance. Leaders called for a ceasefire in Gaza and Lebanon, emphasizing peace in conflict zones. The summit also prioritized social justice and sustainable development, pledging $11 trillion to stimulate the global economy and $20 billion for vaccines in poorer nations. Additionally, discussions included reforms for global institutions and initiatives to combat climate change while promoting digital and financial inclusion. Welcome to In Depth. At the G20 summit in Rio de Janeiro, world leaders called for a global pact to combat hunger, more humanitarian aid for Gaza, and an end to the wars in Ukraine and the Middle East. The Chicago Tribune put forward that the joint declaration emphasized broad goals but lacked specific actions on how to achieve them due to divisions among G20 members. The statement included a push for a global tax on billionaires and reforms to the UN Security Council, though it faced oppositions from countries like Argentina. Brazil, under President Lula's leadership, highlighted a global alliance against hunger and poverty, with 82 nations on board. The declaration also called for the Security Council's reform, but offered no concrete solutions to its expansion. Also at the G20 summit, the world's largest economies issued a joint statement that notably softened previous criticism of the Russia-Ukraine war, with only a broad reference to the human suffering caused by the war. The Financial Times reported that the statement also included calls for a ceasefire in Gaza, measures to alleviate poverty, and reforms to the UN Security Council. Additionally, the communiqué reiterated demands for increased climate finance, although the emission of a transition from fossil fuels drew criticism.
In a world facing turbulent times, the two-day G20 summit has begun on Monday in Rio de Janeiro, bringing together leaders of the world's largest economies. The agenda prioritizes combating poverty and reforming global institutions. Brazilian President Lula da Silva aims to use the summit to launch the Global Alliance to Combat Hunger and Poverty, seeking firm financial commitments from G20 nations to boost food production and tackle hunger worldwide. United Nations Secretary-General Antonio Guterres urged leaders to embrace their leadership role and make the necessary compromises to achieve a positive outcome at the COP29 climate conference in Baku, where negotiations have been stalled for a week. While Brazil, as the summit host, has emphasized poverty and food security, discussions are expected to be dominated by pressing global crises, including the war in Ukraine and escalating conflicts in the Middle East. Topics like trade, climate change, and international security are likely to face challenges, particularly as President-elect Donald Trump prepares to take office in January. Fears of an escalating trade war between the United States and China loom large, as Trump has announced plans to impose steep tariffs on imports from China and other countries, including European allies. His push for significant tax cuts in the United States further complicates efforts to address global taxation of the wealthy.
For more analysis, we are joined now from Rio de Janeiro by Vitilio Brustelin, a researcher at Harvard's History of Science Department. And also we are joined from New Delhi by Dr. Neha Sinha, Assistant Professor at Ambedkar University. Welcome. Now, Mr. Brustelin, what is your opinion on the outcomes until now of the G20 summit in Rio de Janeiro regarding global poverty and hunger first?
Well, thank you for having me. I think this is the most concrete result from the conference. This global pact to fight hunger and poverty, it's more important than, for example, the final declaration, because in the last two summits of G20, it was not possible to write a final declaration because there was no consensus. So this pact to fight hunger is important because so far 82 countries in the world signed the document. Also, there is a structure planned to be inside United Nations. Some countries can donate money for a fund, and countries with big problems with poverty can loan this money from the fund and try to solve the problems inside the countries. Of course, we don't believe it will solve all problem of poverty in the world, but it can help potentially thousands of people.
But do you think there's consensus right now, especially when there are opinions such as what the Chicago Tribune put forward, that the joint declaration perhaps emphasized some sort of broad goals, however, it lacks specific actions on how to achieve them?
That's absolutely true. The G20 has countries like Russia, for example. Russia was against a declaration that would name Russia as one of the problems. So in the declaration, there is no name of Russia or Israel. It's just about the victims, so about Gaza, about Ukraine. Also, there is no plan to tax big fortunes, rich people, for example. In the conference was presented a document of a French economist who said that a taxation of the fortunes of the 3,000 billionaires of the world, 2% of the fortunes would provide $200 billion per year, but it was not in the final document. It was very, very hard to write a final declaration and find a consensus for that declaration. So it's true that there is a lack of objectives that a plan to perform the objectives. But I think the biggest achievement of this conference is the Global Pact for to fight the hunger and poverty. This is more important than the declaration, actually.
Okay, let me go to Dr. Sinha now. Issues like poverty and hunger and also climate change, many of the statements declare that perhaps they are incited by conflict. How do you perceive the main outcomes of the G20 summit in relation to resolving these conflicts, specifically in Gaza and Lebanon for now?
Thank you. Thank you for having me. So we see that the G20 leaders who have met to discuss many relevant issues like, hunger, poverty, apart from that, sustainable development, energy transition, and they aim to boost chance of deal at UN climate talks. And they've also called for rapidly increasing the climate finance. And we see that the G20 countries are responsible for most of the world's emission. Here, if we talk about, I take the 5 takeaways from the G20 summit. First, we see that in the declarations, leaders have, they have agreed that the world must reach an agreement by the end of the United Nations COP29 climate change, which they are meeting in Azerbaijan on a new financial objective as for how much money affluent nation must give to the poor developing countries. Second, I see that the talks on Ukraine war. Now, the war in Ukraine is, that was dominated in the G20 negotiations. And in their closing declaration, we have seen that the G20 leaders, they have expressed their support for all relevant and constructive initiatives that support a comprehensive, just, and you can say a durable peace in Ukraine. When it comes to Lebanon Gaza ceasefire calls, that is the third point which I could, which I can highlight, takeaway from the G20 summit. That the leaders of the G20, which includes staunch Israel supporters such as the United States and Argentina, as well as you can say more pro-Palestinian countries such as Turkey, they've called for comprehensive ceasefire in Gaza and Lebanon. Now, they stated that the Gaza ceasefire should be, consistent with a UN resolution sponsored by the United States, asking for a, lasting truce in the area in exchange for Hamas release of all captives. It also looked for a truce in Lebanon that would allow residents to return safely to their homes on both sides of the blue line, which separates Lebanon and the Israelis' armed troops. So these are some of the facts that have been
And
brought
perhaps
up
the
during the
consensus
negotiations. And
are around the importance of humanitarian aid to reach specific or the deserved people in Gaza and in Lebanon.
true
However, Dr.
that
Sinha, if they are not really reaching consensus towards action plans, even specific towards issues like climate change or poverty or hunger, how do you think they're going to reach consensus through resolving conflicts
the
in the Middle East?
I was, yes, I was about to talk about the other 2 points, which was Alliance Against Hunger, that has already been discussed, but also the to tax the super rich, that has been into discussion in support of the working together to ensure that the ultra high net worth individuals are, effectively taxed. The G20 gave, it was given by the Brazilian president. However, the statement said was a kind of collaboration with full respect to, tax sovereignty, and entails debate around the tax principles. So these are other issues that has been, discussed, but we need to see that how all these issues which has been taken up in the G20 summit are, it's basically the negotiations. It's there has been discussions, there has been talks about it, but how they are going to, you know um, combat the issues. What is the solution? The final stage comes when, a lot of discussion, but what is the result, and what is the
Right.
final steps, what is the final product? So let's focus now. The focus is on the solution. A lot of discussion has been made on the forefront, but the solution and the progress has to be, the implementation
All right.
has to be done.
Mr. Bruchelen, now, obviously, when we're talking about taxes and tariffs, there's a figure he's physically absent from the G20 summit. However, he perhaps is attending unconsciously in everyone's mind, President-elect Donald Trump. How might Trump's proposed tariffs impact global trade and cooperation among the G20 members during his upcoming presidency?
And that's a very good question, because after the election of Trump, everything is different. So President Milei, for example, the president of Argentina, was the first president to meet Trump in person. It was in the last week. Milei now is like a representative of Trump in South America. Also, there is a point that we need to clarify, because the G20, the summit of the group of 20, is an informal summit. So we are talking about an informal group. It's not like United Nations, a formal group where we can have a hard law inside the core of the institution. So in this summit, we are talking about soft law. Soft law is just like that. It's declarations. It's diplomatic declaration. It's very, very hard to find, to meet consensus for this kind of declaration, because the world is crossing a kind of second Cold War. So we are putting together countries like Russia and United States in the same summit. And with the election of Trump, everything is different because Trump is against multilateralism. We know that because we saw that in the first mandate. So right now we have this situation. We have a president of the United States that is in denial about the climate change. He's saying that he will put the United States out of the Paris Agreement again, like he did in 2017. And also other presidents, like President Milei, for example, is challenged to do the same. He's saying he could take Argentina out of the agreement. Milei, in the last week, took the commission, the committee of Argentina from COP29. So right now we have these problems. We have a lack of democracy inside international institutions like United Nations, but also we have this geopolitical situation that is very, very similar with the Cold War.
Okay, Dr. Sinha, in order to actually assess any kind of effectiveness of the G20 in addressing issues like humanitarian crises, how do you assess the past effectiveness of the G20 in confronting such issues?
We've seen the G20 summit. If we see the last summit that took place in New Delhi, and the implementation with regards to the objectives that was discussed in the summits. So we've seen a lot of initiatives have been taken, but much more has to be taken. We have also seen in the G20 summits that the leaders, they keep meeting, they engage themselves in series of, high profile bilateral meetings with world leaders in order to, strengthen their global partnership across diverse sectors. So, the bilateral meeting that they keep happening, that keeps happening in during the sidelines of the, G20 summit that has been happening. I think the bilateral, meetings also becomes important in order to, come to a conclusion, in order to strengthen the, group organization, to come to an outcome in order to, combat the issues that are prevailing basically. So I see the bilateral meetings, that is very important for the proactive stance on global cooperation, to build a resilient, future-oriented partnership, and to combat the issues that are prevailing, basically, which can be, humanitarian crisis, which can be related to, any initiative in order to, strengthen the foreign policy of a particular country.
Right. Before we continue this discussion, let's take a look at the goals of the G20 summit. Stay with us, please. We are joined in Dr. Neha Sinha, an assistant professor at Ahmedkar University. Welcome again to the program. Now, let's talk about the goals that we've just seen on the screen. Now, one of these goals, Mr. Bruxelles, was the imposing taxes on billionaires. Now, how do you think this is going to be applied? And also putting in mind that Trump is coming in January.
it will not be applied. It's the first time this is mentioned in an international declaration like this. It's just a declaration because the countries have the intention to discuss this in the future. Like I just said, this is soft law. The G20 has no power to impose these declaration, these initiatives to any country. It's not like the Security Council of United Nations, for example. But your question is important because Brazil had three priorities for this conference: climate change, poverty mitigation, and reforms in global governance. Also, the taxation of billionaires. So climate change after the election of Trump is a problem for the world right now. Putin is asking Trump to not leave the agreement of Paris again. Putin. Second, reforms in global governance. This is not realistic at this moment, but the world is going even more dangerous to a situation of war right now with the crisis in Ukraine and the missiles that the United Nations just authorized Zelensky to use inside Russia territory. So right now, it's important to have reforms in global governance, but how? India, for example, China is against India inside the Security Council. Also, China is against Japan and Germany. In Brazil, Mexico has a problem with Brazil inside the Security Council. So we don't have a consensus about that too. So the only thing I can point out that was really a solution in this conference was this initiative for poverty mitigation. It's not a big thing, but it's something concrete, at least for now. We don't have any other ways to go ahead with the world crossing this situation.
Okay, Dr. Sinha, now there has been proposals to enhance technological innovation to support developing countries. Brazil has been very vocal about this. India also has been very vocal about this. How do you see these proposals, and how imperative are they for the future?
This is one area which is very important. The question is it is of great significance basically, because when we talk about the technological development, it's going to impact all the countries basically on the international realm. And when we talk about the development of a particular country, of a particular nation, technological development plays a pivotal role basically here. And we see how it also enhances the foreign policy of a particular country. So, as I was mentioning about the bilateral meetings that have been taking place during the sidelines of the G20 summit, a lot of discussion also has been done by countries in terms of addressing shared challenges in technology, trade, climate change, apart from technology, basically. In fact, the Prime Minister of India, his interaction with leaders, underscored India's growing diplomatic engagement and commitment to address the challenges and mutual cooperation in order to address the technological issues if the countries are facing, or a move in order to cooperate so that there can be technological advancement. So this is one area which is very important, and this is one area which is very important for the G20. The countries, the countries, and as we know that now it is also joined by the African Union. So a lot of African nations, we see here that the involvement of the African countries becomes very important here with the joining of the African Union in 2023. So technology plays a pivotal role for all the countries here, especially the countries of the African continent, which is 54 countries if you talk about the African continent.
Well, thank you very much. That was Dr. Neha Sinha, an assistant professor at Ambedkar University from New Delhi, and also joined us from Rio de Janeiro, Vitilio Bruxellin, a researcher at Harvard History of Science Department. Thank you both for your insights. Now, that brings us to the end of today's episode of In Depth. Thanks for watching, and stay tuned for more.